I stared up at the glossy tower of steel and glass that cut into the skyline like a blade. The address had been burned into my mind for months. The Penthouse of Altair Residences. A place so exclusive it wasn't even listed publicly, people only got in by referral. Unless, of course, you had forged documents, a new face on your profile, and the right contacts in digital real estate forums. My name on the lease wasn't my real one. I was now Elise Monroe, quiet, nondescript, a curator of modern art with a vague European upbringing. Harmless. Untraceable. A ghost who just happened to rent half of a multi-million-dollar penthouse. I hadn't planned to live with anyone. The leasing agent said the other tenant traveled constantly. A businessman. Rarely home. Perfect. But when I unlocked the door and stepped into the black marble foyer, I heard the low murmur of a phone call echoing down the hallway. I froze. And then I saw him. Black suit, crisp collar, dark hair still damp from the shower. Standing in the kitchen, one hand around a coffee mug, the other holding his phone to his ear. Sebastian Wolf. CEO of Wolf Capital. The man who once looked me dead in the eyes as he tore apart my design portfolio in front of the entire marketing team. Derivative, he'd said. Like someone copied an artist but forgot the emotion. And then, the final blow, we don't promote interns who mimic. We promote visionaries. He hadn't even remembered my name. I had left the office 2 hours later, humiliated and dismissed. That was 2 years ago. And now, somehow, the universe had dropped me right in the center of his lair. Or maybe I had orchestrated the fall myself. You're Elise, he said, turning toward me, his voice still clipped from the call. He gave me a once-over. Didn't expect anyone until next week. Lee started early, I said, lowering my gaze just slightly, just enough to seem harmless. Is that a problem? As long as you stay on your side and don't touch my scotch, we won't have a problem. His words were ice. His presence was colder. But he didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker of suspicion in those calculating gray eyes. I stepped forward and set my bag down, surveying the apartment with mock awe. High ceilings. Wall-to-wall windows that looked down on the city like a throne room. The kind of place meant for kings. You have a beautiful home, I murmured. Expensive doesn't always mean beautiful, he said, walking past me. But I'll take the compliment. That was our first conversation. Short. Measured. But I saw the shift in his eyes when I didn't react to his arrogance. He was used to submission. Deference. Fear. I gave him none of it. That night, I unpacked slowly, placing each item with care. My skincare bottles on the sink, my silk blouses in the closet, my laptop charger coiled neatly on my desk. Every piece of me had been curated to play a part. Not the timid intern he once crushed. Someone new. Someone untouchable. The next morning, I found a note in the kitchen. Please don't use the espresso machine before 8 a.m. He signed it with just a dash, as if writing his name would be a waste of ink. I smiled and made my coffee at 7:55. We moved around each other like ghosts. Polite. Cool. Civil, but beneath every glance was a current, a spark. He watched me from the corner of his eye as I lounged on the sofa reading architecture magazines. I listened to his meetings through the half-closed office door, noting his every pattern, every name dropped. One night, I passed him in the hallway wearing an off-the-shoulder cashmere sweater and barely their silk shorts. He paused. His eyes dropped. Just for a second. But it was enough. I kept walking. Silent. Unbothered. Every move I made was a calculation. Every silence was a message. I could feel him watching me now, curious, unsettled. As if he couldn't place what was wrong with this picture. He was used to control. But I was something unfamiliar. And I liked watching him squirm. What he didn't know was that this game had only just begun. I didn't come here to cohabitate. I came here to win. The tension between us became a third presence in the apartment. It hummed low, like static in the walls. We barely spoke, but every word we did share had weight. I started to enjoy the silence between our exchanges more than anything else, like a taut rope stretched between two cliffs, daring one of us to pull first. He still didn't recognize me. Not even when I left sketches out on the dining table, bold charcoal lines, familiar to anyone who had once held my portfolio in their hands. But to Sebastian Wolf, I had been faceless. Just another name on an intern badge, easily discarded. It worked in my favor. I moved with grace now. Confidence. My appearance was different, hair darker, cut sharper. My clothes, sleek and minimalist. I wore his world like armor. On the fourth night, he asked, "What gallery did you say you worked with again?" "I didn't," I replied smoothly. "But I used to freelance. Took some time off to recalibrate." "Recalibrate?" His brow rose as he leaned against the kitchen island, arms folded. "That's vague." "So is most of what you say during those late-night meetings," I countered, not looking up from my glass of wine. "And yet you always manage to get your way." He tilted his head, something flickering behind his eyes. "Interest? Annoyance? Maybe both. Are you spying on me?" "You're very loud," I said, sipping. "And very predictable." The smirk he gave me was sharp enough to cut glass. But underneath it, I saw the twitch of curiosity. For the first time, he was off balance. He didn't know how to place me. It was glorious. That weekend, he left for New York. I had the penthouse to myself. I wandered through his office, careful not to disturb anything. Just enough to take in the layout, the documents left on his desk, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air. I found the folder with upcoming design bids. There it was, Sable, the boutique branding firm I launched 6 months ago under a partner's name. We were shortlisted to redesign Wolf Capital's private equity portfolio. A portfolio I knew intimately. Because I'd once offered him a concept for it, and he had ripped it apart in front of a crowd. That presentation had never left me. I memorized every flaw he claimed I had. I used them as my blueprint. The new version? Sleeker. Colder. Brilliant. He would choose it. He just didn't know yet that it came from the woman he once belittled. On Monday, he returned. Late. Tired. I was in the living room, curled on the couch in one of his dress shirts I'd accidentally tossed into the laundry. When he saw me, something shifted in his expression. "That's mine," he said, voice lower than usual. "It was clean," I replied. "I assumed you wouldn't mind." I didn't move. I watched him watch me. His jaw clenched. "You assumed a lot." "I do that," I said, smiling faintly. "You strike me as the kind of man who likes things just so. But deep down, you enjoy a little chaos." He stepped forward, slow. "Intentional." "Do I?" "You invited a stranger into your home," I said, tilting my head. "That's not something control freaks do." "You're not what I expected," he murmured. His eyes flicked to my lips, then back up. "Not by a long shot." "Good." I stood, brushing past him, just enough to let the shirt graze his arm. Expectations are boring. That night, the silence between us throbbed. I could feel him pacing in his room long after midnight. The next morning, he made coffee for both of us. Wordlessly. Set my mug on the counter. I met his gaze. "Careful," I said, taking a sip. "You're starting to act like you don't hate having me here." He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it, either. And that was the moment I knew, I had him questioning everything. He thought he ran this apartment. This world. Me. But I was already inside his head. The only thing left was to make him beg to stay there. He started lingering in rooms he used to breeze through. His routine shifted. He used to leave before sunrise, now he poured coffee slower, glanced over at me while pretending to read emails on his phone. I caught him watching me twice that week. Once when I emerged from the shower in a towel, humming some old jazz tune that clashed with the sterile silence of his penthouse. And once when I leaned over the kitchen counter, barefoot, editing pitch slides on my laptop while sipping a glass of white wine. "You're an unusual roommate," he said one night, breaking the silence as we both stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "You don't talk much. But you seem to know everything." "Maybe I just pay attention," I replied. "Most people don't. Most people are busy pretending to be interesting." I turned to face him. "And what are you pretending to be?" His jaw tightened, just a twitch, but enough. "I don't pretend," he said. "Everything I am, I earned." "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" I asked. "That coldness is the same thing as strength?" He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and calculated. "Do you enjoy pushing people?" "Only when they lean too far forward," I murmured. "And you look like you're about to fall." He didn't move. Neither did I. The air between us was electric. Dangerous. And yet, we both held back. That restraint was intoxicating. The next morning, I wore his shirt again. This time unbuttoned low enough to make a point. I poured 2 coffees before he could and set his mug down with a faint smile. "You're welcome," I said, not waiting for thanks. He looked at me like he couldn't decide if he wanted to insult me or kiss me. I was fine with either. I got an email later that day. Wolf Capital had selected a new design firm for their rebranding project. Sable. My firm. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I waited until I heard his phone call, muffled through the office door, his voice clipped and measured, but laced with interest. They delivered something clean. Disruptive. Looks like it came from someone who understands how I think. I smiled, alone in the hallway. Of course it did. I'd spent years learning how he thought. I moved through the apartment like it was mine. I began reorganizing the shared spaces. Small touches. My book stacked neatly on the coffee table, a new abstract print hung in the hallway, better lighting in the kitchen. He didn't comment on it. But I saw the shift. He started leaving post-it notes. Good choice on the light bulbs. That book bored me after chapter 4. Did you repaint the vase? Looks better. We weren't talking, but we were communicating. And I was slowly rewriting the space we shared, bending it around me. One night, he stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring whiskey into a glass. He handed me one without asking. Do you always move in like this? He asked. Like what? Like you've always lived here. Like you belong more than the person who paid for it. Maybe I do, I said, taking the glass. Maybe you're just noticing now. He chuckled, low and surprised, as if it had been years since he laughed at anything that wasn't cruel. You have a strange effect on people, he said. Or maybe it's just me. Does that bother you? I asked. He didn't answer. Just stared at me for a long, tense moment before walking away. But later that night, I found the bottle of wine I had been eyeing sitting on the counter. Open. Breathing. A single note beside it, thought you might want this. His handwriting was clean, mechanical, but the gesture was anything but. He was unraveling. Slowly. Beautifully. And he still didn't know who I was. Not yet. But he would. When the moment was right, I would remind him of exactly who I used to be. And then I'd show him how much had changed. The shift happened so gradually, it was almost imperceptible. 1 minute, we were ignoring each other across rooms, the next, we were sharing bottles of wine, dissecting architecture journals on the balcony, and arguing over who made the better pasta sauce at midnight. He was losing track of his edges around me. Slipping. But I wasn't. I remembered everything. The fluorescent lights of that boardroom. His voice, sharp and dismissive, dissecting my work like it was beneath his attention. I remembered the flush of shame on my cheeks, the silence of the team, the slow burn of humiliation that bloomed into something colder, sharper. It lived in me. It anchored me. That weekend, he invited me to a gallery opening. Casual. Offhand. There's a curator I know. His work's decent. Thought you might want to see something outside these walls for once. I should have said no. But I tilted my head and asked, will there be champagne? Endless. Then I'm in. I wore black. Sleek. Understated. With red lipstick that made him stare a second too long when I emerged from my room. He wore navy, no tie, collar open, confidence dripping like cologne. We didn't speak in the elevator. But our eyes met in the mirrored walls. And for the first time, he looked at me like he wanted to solve a mystery he didn't know he was part of. At the gallery, people flocked to him. He played the role effortlessly, aloof but magnetic. He introduced me as his roommate. People blinked in surprise. One even asked, how does that arrangement work? Surprisingly well, he said, without looking at me. She's difficult to ignore. My smile didn't waver, but my chest tightened. He was walking closer to the edge, and he didn't even know it. We drank. We critiqued. He leaned in more. I laughed louder. The tension stretched thinner. By the time we returned to the penthouse, the silence between us was humming. I slipped off my heels by the door. He tossed his jacket onto a chair. You don't talk about your past, he said suddenly. Why is that? Maybe there's nothing to say. Or maybe there's too much. I turned to face him. And what about you? Do you always pretend you don't remember the people you destroy? His brows furrowed. Just for a split second. I saw the crack. Then it vanished. What are you talking about? Nothing, I said, brushing past him. Just one of those vague things I do. But that night, I left my old intern ID tucked into his briefcase. The photo slightly faded. The name clear. I knew he'd find it the next day. I knew it would knock the air out of him. And it did. I came home that evening to silence. He stood by the window, staring out like he'd been there for hours. When I set down my bag, he turned. Slowly. The badge was on the table. "You're Quinn Vale," I said calmly. "Yes." His expression was unreadable. But his voice? Fractured. "You lived here for weeks and didn't tell me? You didn't remember me. You orchestrated this. You're only just figuring that out?" He took a step forward. Then another. But his certainty was gone. "Why?" "Because you taught me that power comes from erasure. And I wanted you to feel what that's like." This wasn't revenge, he said, but it sounded more like a question. "Wasn't it?" I asked. "You mocked me. You humiliated me. I lost everything. I rebuilt from ash, Sebastian. And now you look at me like I'm the only real thing in your life." He stared at me, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he once dismissed. "I didn't know," he said finally. "That's the point," I whispered. "You never looked hard enough to care." He didn't respond. And I didn't wait for him to. I walked to my room, heels echoing across the stone floor, and shut the door behind me. But I knew he wouldn't sleep that night. I knew he'd replay every conversation, every glance, every smirk. And I knew he'd finally started to see me. Not as a shadow of the past, but as the storm in his present. The air was different the next morning. Tighter. He didn't greet me. Didn't look at me. Just sat at the kitchen island, jaw locked, fingers curled around a black coffee mug like it was the only thing anchoring him. I poured mine slowly. Let the silence stretch like wire between us. "You're angry," I said. "I'm trying to understand," he replied, voice low. "Were you ever being honest with me? Or was it all performance? What part are you asking about? The mornings? The wine? Or the part where you started falling for someone you didn't even know?" That got him. He flinched, just slightly. Then set the mug down harder than necessary. "Don't flatter yourself." "Oh, but I don't have to." "You already did." He stood. Walked toward me, all sharp lines and tightly coiled restraint. "You lied to me. You infiltrated my home, I signed a lease. You left the door open. All I did was walk through. You manipulated me. I gave you the chance to see what you missed the first time. You failed twice." He was breathing harder now. His mask was cracking. I could see it in the way his fingers twitched, how his words came slower, heavier. "This isn't a game to me," he said. "Then it's unfortunate," I said quietly, "that you treated me like a pawn in one." He backed off, turning away. The tension between us didn't break. It thickened. That night, he didn't come home. The penthouse was silent. I poured myself a drink, watched the city from the windows, and waited. Not for him, but for the moment the power would shift completely. When he finally returned, it was nearly 2 a.m. His tie was gone. Shirt unbuttoned. His eyes found mine instantly. "You win," he said, voice rough. "Is that what you want to hear?" "It's not about winning," I replied. "It's about memory. You forgot me. But I remembered you every single day. Not because I was broken. But because I knew I could do better." "You did," he admitted. "You made me feel something I haven't in years. You turned my apartment into a home I looked forward to coming back to." He moved closer, step by step. "You destroyed me without ever raising your voice." "That was never the plan," I said. "But I won't apologize for it either." "I don't want an apology," he said. "I want the truth." I stared at him. Let him see all of it. The girl he broke. The woman who came back sharper. Smarter. I was the product of his failure. And now, the woman he couldn't stop wanting. "I didn't come here for you," I said. "I came here to rebuild what you tried to erase. But somewhere along the way, you changed. And I did too." He was inches from me now. "Do you hate me?" "Sometimes," I whispered. "But that doesn't mean I don't see you." "And what do you see?" I looked him over, slowly. A man who's not as in control as he wants to be. A man who's never been challenged until someone he underestimated burned the blueprint. He laughed once, bitter and beautiful. "You're dangerous. You should have known that when I moved in. You could still walk away," he said. "Start over. I wouldn't stop you. But you'd hate it," I said. "You'd miss every second of this war." He didn't answer. Just stepped even closer, until the space between us was thin as breath. "Tell me what you want now," he murmured. "Now that I see you." I want you to remember this feeling, I said. The one you gave me 2 years ago. Uncertainty. Powerlessness. Hunger. But this time, you'll sit with it. Because I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. We stood there, locked in a silence more intimate than any touch. And I knew then, he didn't want control anymore. He wanted chaos. He wanted me. And I was just getting started. After that night, everything changed, without a single official declaration. We became something undefined, volatile, suspended in a constant push and pull. Some mornings he was cold again, guarded behind his glass and steel persona. Others, I'd find fresh pastries on the counter with a note, figured you'd skip breakfast again. When we spoke, the air crackled. We circled each other like rivals in a dance neither of us wanted to end. But the rhythm was mine. He didn't realize it, not fully. He still thought he had the upper hand. Still thought this dynamic was mutual. But I had been pulling the strings since the day I walked through that door. He only began to suspect it when my name appeared in the trades. Not as his roommate. But as the anonymous creative director behind Sable's explosive new campaigns, one of which had landed his company in the spotlight. "You're Sable," he said one evening, holding his phone like it had betrayed him. "You created the brand we hired." Technically, I founded it. But the creative direction was all me. "You've been inside my head for months." "Longer than that," I said. "But I thought you'd appreciate the irony. You passed on my work when it was raw. You funded it when it was refined." He stared at me like I was a puzzle he didn't have the right pieces for. I'm not sure whether to be furious or impressed. "Be both," I said. "They're not mutually exclusive." That night, we didn't sleep. We argued. Then we laughed. Then we kissed like we wanted to erase the years between us. But I didn't let him undress me. Not yet. That power wasn't his to take. Not anymore. The next morning, he made me breakfast. Real breakfast, poached eggs, fresh arugula, sliced avocado, perfectly buttered toast. "You're trying too hard," I said as I bit into the toast. "Maybe," he replied, sitting across from me. "Or maybe I'm trying just enough for once." He was shifting. Evolving. The predator who used to dismantle people in conference rooms was now quiet, deliberate. Not because he had lost his edge, but because he was finally learning the cost of wielding it without care. I watched him soften. Slowly. And I made sure it was on my terms. I started leaving the penthouse more often. Long hours at my studio. Late meetings. Gala events. I didn't tell him where I was going. I didn't have to. That silence, it made him restless. One night I came home past midnight to find him standing in the hallway, shirt untucked, hair slightly mussed. "You didn't text," he said. "You don't own my time," I replied, walking past him. "You disappeared. You disappear all the time. But you're not me." I turned around. He looked unsteady in a way I hadn't seen before. "You're afraid," I said. "And you should be. Because for the first time I'm not waiting for your approval. I'm choosing when and where to let you in." "Then let me in," he said, stepping closer. "Fully. No more games." I stared up at him. The man who had once dismissed me as a forgettable intern now looked at me like I was the axis on which his world spun. I reached up and touched his jaw. "The games ended the moment you admitted you felt something. This, what we have, it's not built on balance. It's built on what you lost when you didn't see me before." "And what did I lose?" he asked. "The version of me that might have loved you without caution," I said softly. "Now? You'll only get the version that remembers everything." He didn't flinch. He nodded. As if he knew that was the best version I'd ever offer him. That night, I let him into my bed. But not into my heart. Not yet. Because the final move hadn't been played. And when it was, he would finally understand what it meant to fall. The next weeks unfolded like a perfectly tuned symphony. We lived in a rhythm only we understood, filled with heated looks across the kitchen island, subtle brushes of fingers when passing in the hallway, and quiet conversations that revealed more than either of us intended. But beneath all of it was the undercurrent of a war not yet over. He had stopped asking questions. That was his mistake. Because I had more secrets than he realized. Sable wasn't just another design firm. It was the cornerstone of a much larger acquisition. One that included smaller subsidiaries, shell corporations, and a carefully veiled stake in one of Wolf Capital's most lucrative subsidiaries. I had been building the empire he refused to give me a chance to create, right under his nose. And now, I was preparing to take the final step. The morning of the board vote, he noticed something. I was dressed in a black power suit, heels sharp enough to puncture ego. He raised an eyebrow. You have a meeting? A presentation, I said, sipping my espresso. Big day. For Sable? I nodded. Something like that. He leaned closer. You've been vague lately. You never cared much for details before, I said with a smile. Why start now? He watched me leave like he wanted to stop me. But he didn't. I arrived at the boardroom before him. Of course I did. I had been planning this day for over a year. The room filled quickly. Executives. Shareholders. Analysts. And then him. Sebastian Wolf. Walking in like he still owned the world. Until he saw me at the head of the table. His expression didn't falter. Not visibly. But I saw it. The ripple. The confusion. The slow, dawning realization. I stood as the chairman announced the surprise proxy acquisition of a controlling share. On behalf of the lead investor and executive architect of the acquisition, the chairman said, I'd like to introduce Quinn Vale. All eyes turned to me. Sebastian didn't blink. He just stared. Effective immediately, I continued, Sable Holdings will assume majority influence over Wolf Capital's creative and expansion divisions. This transition will include full oversight of executive decisions related to branding, innovation, and long-term vision. There was silence. And then applause. Polite. Confused. Respectful. But none of it mattered. The only thing I heard was the sound of the crown shifting from his head to mine. After the meeting, he waited outside the boardroom. I stepped toward him, unhurried. You planned this from the beginning, he said. Every inch of it. Not every inch, I said. Just the ones that mattered. You could have destroyed me. I still might, I said quietly. But that's not what this is about. This is about rewriting the story. You tried to erase me. I built something you couldn't touch. And now I'm part of it, he said. Whether I like it or not. Exactly. So what now, he asked. Do you expect me to bow? No, I said, stepping closer. I expect you to understand what it feels like to be seen too late. His eyes burned into mine. And if I say I do? Then maybe, I whispered, we can finally stop pretending this isn't what we both wanted all along. He reached for my hand. I let him. But the power was still mine. Because he was no longer the man who dismissed me. And I was no longer the girl who waited for permission. I had become the storm that broke through his empire. And he? He was finally learning how to weather it. He didn't fight it anymore. Not my position. Not my power. Not me. In the days that followed, we slipped into a strange, charged equilibrium. I ran meetings from the glass-walled conference rooms he once dominated. He watched from the sidelines now, a presence with influence, but no longer control. And at night, we returned to the same penthouse. The space where it had all begun. Only now, it felt different. Like it belonged to me. The books were mine. The scent in the air, bergamot and something darker, was mine. Even the rhythm of the lights and music, the quiet luxury of stillness, bent around my presence. Sebastian had once ruled this place like a king. Now he moved through it like a man who had finally learned humility. One evening, I found him on the balcony, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned, scotch in hand. The city sparkled behind him, silent and endless. I stepped out, wrapping my arms around myself. He turned when he sensed me, and for once, there was no smirk. No posture. Just him. I used to believe power meant never being surprised, he said. That the ones who succeeded were always 5 steps ahead. But I didn't see you. And it cost me everything I thought I knew. I joined him at the edge of the balcony, watching the lights below. You didn't want to see me, I said. You wanted to shape the world in your image. And anyone who didn't fit, got left behind. I know, he said, voice low. And I deserve the way this played out. I glanced at him. Do you regret it? Not anymore, he said. Because if I hadn't failed you, I never would have seen who you truly are. And I would have spent my whole life thinking I was invincible. I sipped from his glass. You're not. I know. He turned to face me. But you are. We stood there, side by side, 2 people forged from opposite ends of the same flame. I had expected to destroy him. To humiliate him the way he once did to me. But instead, I found something more powerful than revenge. I found clarity. He saw me now. Completely. Not as an intern. Not as a rival. But as an equal. Or maybe something more. You can still walk away, he said after a long pause. You don't owe me anything. I looked out at the glittering skyline. That's just it, I said. I'm not staying for you. I'm staying because I built this. Piece by piece. This power, this life, it's mine. And whether you're standing beside me or not, I will keep rising. He nodded once. Then let me rise with you. I turned to him. On my terms. Always. We didn't need a promise. Not a kiss. Not even a touch. The shift had already happened. I had walked into this penthouse under a false name, intent on reclaiming what was stolen from me. And now, I stood at the center of everything he once controlled, only this time, I was the one holding the pen. The story was mine now. He would never forget my name again.